Hey, in this video we'll look at how I painted this quick sketch. It's more of a study really, and we'll also look at the reference image I used. My name is Victor, I work as a concept artist, and I'm really excited to show you guys the process. So let's start. I'm filling the canvas with a warm undertone. It's a standard approach since it's easier to work with it than with just the blank canvas. Also, some of it will be seen through the painting on top. Now let's figure out the sketch and the composition. Let me show you also the reference image I used. It's a photo of a church ruin. What you will notice right away is that the image size is quite small. And that actually can be a good exercise if you don't want to dwell on the details and smaller textures, and just look at the basic forms and lighting and use it as a base reference for your study. Now that you have a simple and established line work composition sketch, it's time to think about the mood and lighting in the scene. So let's pick a hue and the value for the sky, ground, and of course the building. And here's where you can reference this information from the image you have. I'm spending a bit of time to define the cloud shapes a bit since it's really easy, and then moving on to the rest of the elements. With just a bigger brush for efficiency's sake, glaze on top of your line work and block it all in. Just with flat color right now. You can of course give it a bit of a texture if you want. For example, I wanted to block in the grass and give it a little bit of a textural variation right from the start, even a little bit of value variation as well. And another helpful thing is to use bigger brush strokes when you work with the foreground and things that are closer to the camera, and make your brush strokes thinner and smaller whenever you go further towards the horizon. This helps with the perspective and also with the scale, because the further away things are, the more compressed they seem. Alright, so once you have everything blocked in, let's quickly map out the shadows. Nothing too fancy here, we see how the light works in the reference image, so just on a separate layer grab a similar value and hue to block in the planes facing away from the sun. As soon as you start adding the shadows, you will see how the form of your object starts to be more fleshed out. And you can think about the rest of the materials bit by bit. I'm starting with the roof, since it has a different local color, so it's like continuing the same logic as before. We first apply flat color on the elements that have a different local color, and then introducing the shadows and more volume later on. Now I'm still defining some of those construction lines, just to make sure I will not miss some of those planes that cast shadows or are turned away from the light. By the way, there is a free brush pack in the description with some of my most used brushes, so feel free to download and experiment with it. Alright, moving on to describing the planes that are in the light. So overall, I think this image will be exposed for light, which means we'll show more variation of values in the light and thus keep the areas in shadow a bit darker and without too much contrast. And since the majority of image is in the light, we now have the task of describing these planes with some nice color and texture variation. And as much as you want to add more value, contrast and details, in order to keep the image clean and readable for the viewer, you should group the values you use. It's very important. So try staying in the same value range when working with these walls that are in the sunlight. I usually use various brushes with a bit more of a textured feel, just to emulate the randomness and the variety of real-life materials. Also, even if we have the main reference, it doesn't mean that your goal is to just copy the image. This type of approach is not going to benefit you too much. Quite contrary to that, you want to make this image your own, so feel free to change the composition and some details according to your vision. For example, I opted for a warmer lighting and slightly different colors overall. You do have the reference image and you should use it as a starting point, but you don't necessarily have to just copy it. You can see that after a while, if you squint at the image and the minor contrast disappears, the whole area has the same value. Now let's see if we can add some interesting foliage and sort of design this building a little bit more. It's definitely going to help to add some variation and interest to the whole thing. So here again, you can start with just the shape and then according to the lighting introduce the shadows and some color variation. And another important thing is when it comes to what kind of brushes and how to approach any given subject matter, try to associate the type of brush with the material you want to paint. For the grass, for example, something with a bit of a bristle or tooth or some texture will work just fine, just to have a different impression from the stone. You can also think about the edges and make sure that the stone has like this sharper look to it, while the grass is going to be a little bit fuzzier. While you're doing that, also try to think about the areas in the shadow. Right now, all of them are kind of simplified. It could be a good idea to paint some details, but nothing too contrasty. Because you remember I said that we're exposing it for light, so the shadows will be darker and low contrast. But some of that cold bounce light from the sky will work just fine. The clouds in the background are giving this nice value contrast with the building. So let's spend some time and define them a little bit better. It's the same process from the beginning, just like a continuation. You can take a textured soft brush and add a little bit of form by showing the areas that are facing away from the light. Think about the contrast within this area. You don't want to create unnecessary value or edge contrast over here. So I'm softening some edges, overall keeping things softer looking. Of course, you don't want to have it look completely monotonous, so here and there you can see some accents, like a bit of a textured brush mark, some rougher looking areas as well. And in terms of color, I'm thinking that it should be kept cold, so no temperature contrast or accents for the clouds. The foreground was left a bit unattended, so let's see if we can introduce some information there. Since we have a different lighting overall, we can maybe show that there is taller grass on the left and it's slightly brighter due to the light hitting it from the right. In general, we don't have to bother too much with packing information in this area because it should be an area of rest, so less details and less contrast. You can also maybe add some smaller rocks here and there to make the whole environment a bit more interesting. Last efforts would probably go into detailing the building, our focal point, perhaps a few windows and some more time spent on the walls and textures. Alright, let's have a look at the final image. Thank you so much for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed the process and find it helpful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing, it helps a ton, and I hope to see you in the next video coming soon.